Welcome back, everyone. J-Bone here for Smash This Podcast. Ooh, yeah. The cream of the crop. J-Bone talking about Dark Side of the Ring. Ooh, yeah. All right. I can't. That's as good as that's going to get. Oh, welcome back, everyone. Tomatonga? Ooh. Little less hair. American Badass Undertaker. I'll take that one instead because I am I am far from Samoan. Um Thank you for joining. We are talking some Dark Side of the Ring. Episode 1 just aired on, is it Viceland. Viceland. And I heard about this recently, and in fact, it was early last week, in the just getting into WrestleMania week, and I've always been, I don't want to say fascinated because that sounds like it's kind of a sickness, but I've always been very curious about certain stories you always hear about, but you never hear the details that you want to hear. A lot of it is myth mixed with a little bit of legend. Um, First of all, I got to say this episode was done very well. I was very happy with how this was produced. Um, I watched the first. I should say that's not the first one. The first episode I saw is actually episode 3. It's the Bruiser Brody episode. Excuse me. Um, and that's on Viceland's or Vice or one of them, or is it both? Their YouTube channel. It's on there, and that is quite the tragic story. I'll be reviewing that one when that one after that one airs. I mean, I could review it now, but I'm going to wait. I'm going to wait on it till it airs in a few weeks. The second one is the Montreal Screwjob. And I know that one's been talked about forever. For like, oh gosh. What is that? 20? No. 25? No. Almost 30 years? Holy crap. That one goes that story goes way back. I mean, that was really the turn of an era, I should say, you know. Um, so that's coming up next week. Montreal screw job, and the third one is Bruiser Brody. Jackson Parker, what is up? So they had some notable names talking about this. They had Eric Bischoff, Bruce Pritchard, Lenny Poffo, who is Savage's brother, Scott Hall, Linda Bolea, Hulk's ex-wife, which is kind of interesting, but it's nice to have that point of view in there as far as Elizabeth goes. Jimmy Hart and Jake Roberts. And it was a nice mix of everyone from that timeline because a majority of it was talking about the 80s through the early 90s. And then after that, it was real sporadic as far as details, but they talked about significant things that did happen. They talked about how when they first, I'll just touch on some of the main things that they talked about and, feelings on it. they talked about how they put them together, and that they when they put them together, they made you love Elizabeth and hate Randy. And I felt that was very interesting. Um, and in watching a lot of the footage, man, I mean it it really takes me back. I was, gosh, seeing them on TV back in the 80s. I was 10, 10-ish, or early to mid 80s. Yeah, about 10, 11. And when you're that old and the way wrestling was back then, um it was as real as it gets, you know, when you're young and there's no social media and all you see is on TV and what they put on TV, and you absorb that in the moment. Um, they talked about the mega powers being together, and that particular storyline hit me quite significantly because I always will remember that storyline because when the Mega Powers split up, it was in downtown Milwaukee. It's probably one of the biggest things that ever happened in Milwaukee wrestling history wise. There's been some significant moments downtown Milwaukee, but that I would say was the biggest. The Saturday night's main event. It was the first event for the WWF at that time at the Bradley Center. And I always hold it near and dear to my heart because my cousin, who was very sick with leukemia, um, was she was a Make a Wish kid, and she got to meet all of her favorites. She got to meet Brother Love, Brutus the Barber Beefcake, so many others. Um, and they talked about the jealousy and uh, and all that stuff at that time. So hearing that part of the story, I'm glad they touched on that because that was such a significant part of Randy Savage's and Elizabeth's history together was, around Hulk Hogan. Um, and how the the relationship, kind of boiled into the storylines and all that, stuff got blurry, and Savage actually became that character that it's not that he didn't love Elizabeth, but he became incredibly jealous of her. And that turned into the storyline. It's crazy. They talked about Liz wanting time off and Randy then being paired up with Sherry, Queen Sherry, scary Sherry. um, and I mentioned that recently that she should have been put in the Hall of Fame with Harlem Heat, but and she did so many other significant things like this. Someday, maybe. So Liz wanted time off, and then they brought her back because the fans wanted her back so bad. They brought her back the next year, and Randy and Elizabeth got married at, was it SummerSlam? Whenever that was, that they got married. I can't remember the event. Uh, I know someone in the chat will, put it in there. They'll look it up and they'll tell me. But yeah, and so many people at that time thought that's when they really got married. I didn't know until years later, growing up, that they'd already had been married and together for what, almost a decade or something like that. And then Jake the Snake Roberts talking about the storyline with the snake and what happened behind the scenes and how Randy didn't trust Jake. And he said, well, how do I know that this snake is fixed? And Jake's like, well, I'm telling you, it's fixed. So Randy makes this story. These stories told from these people are incredible. Stuff that I don't think has ever been out there before. I've never heard them. Randy making Jake the Snake take the cobra and having it bite him, and then Randy watching him, and then eventually, like, you know, trusting him that he was fine after he got bit. Well, Jake was still really pissed about this because he didn't want to get bit. He wanted it to happen to Randy, and so he got the cobra all riled up, and it really bit Randy. I remember watching that. And they did show some of the footage, which was cool, and it actually, he was actually bleeding live on TV, and they said they sent Elizabeth down to help get the snake off or whatever. Yeah, that was crazy. And then within the next few years, and Randy going off to WCW. Pritchard was talking about that, and then him reinventing himself, but not really reinventing himself. He it wasn't broken, so he didn't want to fix it. He just wanted to wrestle. He wasn't done. Because Vince had basically, like I said about JR a few weeks ago, he just, put him up on a shelf and made him do commentary and didn't use him. So he continued to wrestle in WCW, and they brought Liz in then too, even though they were divorced, which is crazy. And I watched right in the midst of the NWO stuff. Some of that's a little blurry, but like the start of the Goldberg stuff, that's about the time I started watching wrestling again because I hadn't watched it in, 5-6 years. There's a whole section of the early part of the 90s where I really wasn't watching much. But I watched WCW because all of my favorites from a decade before were all in WCW. Hogan, Savage, all those guys. Luger from WCW, I don't remember what I saw him before in the 80s. It was before high school. Was it WCW? I guess it was. And then I know he went to WWE later, but I wasn't watching at that time. Bischoff was talking about this then that Liz Liz ended up with Luger, and that it was really a messed up situation because he was married. These stories just blew my mind, because you see stuff on TV back then, and there is no social media. There was no behind the scenes. We didn't know anything back then. I heard later in life that Elizabeth was with him, but I don't remember the storyline that they were actually together on TV. I remember Elizabeth being with Randy, but anyways, um, but that's how that was back then. And then they talked about um, Elizabeth dying with Lex Luger when she was with him, and Eric Bischoff having Lex Luger on his podcast in 2017 and basically owning up to what happened. Um, and I don't think fans to this day have forgiven Lex. Lex has turned into a shell of what he was back then. I mean, he was one of my favorites back in the day. You know, just he was Lex was awesome back then. Um, and they talked about how Liz should be in the Hall of Fame. And absolutely, Randy is in the Hall of Fame. Liz should have went in with him. Um, at this point, it doesn't matter how she died. I mean, if we started picking apart people's lives of the wrestlers back throughout history and judged them for what they did in their lives and who they were with and what they did behind the scenes, nobody would be in the Hall of Fame. It's the same thing with Michael Jackson. People said he should be taken out of the Hall of Fame. Hall of Fame said, if we are going to do that and start looking and pulling apart people's lives that are already in the Hall of Fame, nobody would be in the Hall of Fame. Yeah, it's truth. Whether you like Michael Jackson or appreciate him or hate him for what he did, what's all coming out this year, I won't get into that, but it's it's been all over social media. Um, but yeah, Liz absolutely, no matter how she died, the tragedy that it is, should be in the Hall of Fame. Um, Maybe this story from this series will spark the discussion, and maybe it'll happen next year. I hope it does. I mean, honestly, this year, if you look at the class of uh, the WWE's Hall of Fame, it was a monumental year for women. China got in, Tori got in, and Luna Vachon got put in the legend. Was it what they call the Legends Wing or the Legacy Wing? I forget what they call it. And they had a handful of people or 10 people or something. Bruiser Brody also got put in there. Wahoo McDaniel. Um, So, 3 women went in the Hall of Fame this year. That's pretty epic. So, hopefully, somehow, some way, she will be recognized with Randy, by herself or with Randy. You know, um, it's time. You know, I think enough time has passed, and I mean, if you're going to put China in, you've got to put Elizabeth in. Seriously. And I'm not saying that China shouldn't be in. I'm glad she was put in with DX. And that's fine. I'm good with that. I still have to watch the Hall of Fame from this year, by the way. Um, I heard so much about it. I really want to watch it now. I usually watch it live, but I didn't watch anything that night. Um, and then they talked about Randy a few years later getting remarried and dying in the car wreck, and the things that he was doing for um, the positive things he was doing with his life, with kids, the Special Olympics, and how he treated fans and stuff like that. They talked a lot about that at the end. Um, so sad. Can't believe that was almost 10 years ago now that Randy's passed. So, uh, in fact, I was just reflecting this last day or two. It's been 5 years since Ultimate Warrior passed. You know, um, so yeah. Overall, everyone putting all their input together and production, how the production was and how they had it like reenacted, the slow mo, the blurry. Um, I enjoyed how they did that. I mean, you could tell it is what it is when they reenact like the slow mo emotional stuff. It just you see other specials done like that too, crime things and stuff like that, who done it's on other channels. So yeah, this was really well done. You hear bits, excuse me, you hear bits and pieces of these stories throughout the years from different people, different sides, but there's always a feeling of when is the complete story going to come out, things like that. And this was, it was an hour, and that's fine. Everything they did from early 80s throughout the rest of his career, how they pieced it together from people's opinions, I felt it was really well done. So um, here's to Randy and Elizabeth, and cheers to Viceland putting together the series. Dark Side of the Ring, bravo! This first episode was great. Um, I'll be reviewing the whole series. It sounds like there's going to be at least six or seven episodes. Um, I watched the third one. Like I said, I'm going to review the third one after it airs. I could review it now, but I'll wait for the sake of, it airing and people watching it. I mean, you could watch it now. It's on there. It's on there. And that was fascinating because I heard so many little things about Bruiser Brody over the years. And well, I won't spoil anything, but just to hear um, people come forth years later and really put the truth out there about what happened to him. Um, Crazy, it felt like with the story being told that there was some kind of justice done with it. You know, I'll put it that way. You gotta watch it. So tremendous episode, tragic yet epic. Um, True. What do they describe it on social media? The Bonnie and Clyde, Romeo and Juliet, Randy and Elizabeth. So we wrap up this one. Thank you for watching. Like I said, I'll be doing the whole series. Don't forget to smash that like button, smash that sub button, and ring that bell for notifications so that you know when more of my content hits your screen. We'll be catching up on some MLW next tomorrow sometime. And I don't know what we're going to do the rest of the week. We'll see. So take care, folks. We'll see you down the road real soon.